Hi, and welcome to the Men on the Path to Love podcast, the How to Say You're Sorry in Relationship episode. I'm Bill Simpson, your host. I coach men who are struggling in relationship, how to communicate effectively, build trust, and deepen intimacy so they can be the best version of themselves in relationship and live the life they love. As I mentioned in the last episode of the Men on the Path to Love podcast, my wife was watching a reality show about relationships, and she noticed how badly the couples on the show were apologizing to each other. She suggested I do an episode on how to say you're sorry in relationship, and I agreed that there is a need for this, and here we are. So, how do you say you're sorry in relationship? Well, I thought it would be better to start with some examples of what not to say or do. Then I'll share a better way. See if any of these apply to you, or if you've experienced any of these with your spouse or partner. And I'll be giving you some examples using some things I've heard my clients say, and of course I won't be using their real names. Okay, so here we go. I'll start with the non-apology apology. Now, this can get a little tricky, so stay with me on this, all right? The non-apology apology is when what the person says sounds like an apology, but they fail to own their part in it. So, say Betty says to Al, "What you said really hurt my feelings." And Al says, "I'm sorry you were hurt." Well, it sounds like an apology, but what's missing is Al owning his part in it. Basically, he's blaming Betty's feelings or how she reacted to what he said, instead of recognizing that what he said hurt Betty's feelings. Now, here's how it could have been better. When Betty says, "What you said really hurt my feelings," Al could have said, "I can see that what I said hurt your feelings, and I'm sorry." It can be that simple. Now, here's where it gets a little tricky. Back in the Mindful Communication episode, I give an example that's kind of like a non-apology apology, but not really. Let me give you an example. Instead of Al saying, "I can see that what I said hurt your feelings and I'm sorry," he could say, in a sincere way, mind you, and I'll get into the whole sincerity thing later, he could say something like, "I'm sorry you experienced me that way. That wasn't my intention. Tell me more, or tell me how I did that, because I don't want to hurt you." Now, this is responding to her experience, yet the difference is that he wants to know how he did it, and he acknowledges that he doesn't want to hurt her. He's taking some responsibility here, and he's showing some empathy. And speaking of empathy, apologizing without empathy doesn't take that other person's feelings into consideration, so the apology can seem flat or insincere. The person doesn't feel seen or heard. I've said that a lot. And along with empathy, you want to have an understanding of what you did wrong, which can help in changing your behavior. That's why it's important to say, "Tell me more," as I mentioned. Another thing I've seen couples do when they try to apologize, and you may have heard me talk about this before, and that's being defensive and turning the tables on the other person instead of taking responsibility or having empathy. An example would be Denise saying to Eric, "I'm angry that you didn't empty the dishwasher like I asked you. You said you would." And Eric saying, "Well, I'm sorry. I would have if you hadn't waited until the last minute to ask me." Well, here again, no responsibility and no empathy. Now, Eric could have said something like, "You're right. You did ask me, and I said I would, and I apologize." So simple. Big difference, right? Here's a big one. The conditional apology, where there are strings attached to the apology. So, say Tia says to Ruben, You called me a bitch, and that really hurt, and I need you to apologize." And Reuben says, "Yeah, well, I'll apologize to you when you apologize to me for blah, 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 blah." Well, again, no responsibility here. And it may make Tia feel like she's not important, or may feel manipulated in some kind of way. So Reuben could have said something like, "I was wrong to call you a bitch. You didn't deserve that, and I apologize." See how easy that is? Okay, the next one is not being sincere with your apology. So important. And this reminds me of kids when their parents tell them to apologize to their sibling, and they're like, "Sorry," but they don't really mean it. Well, we can do that as adults too. Like when Amy was hurt and asked Jack to apologize for yelling at her, and he says, "Well, I'm sorry you feel that way." Well, Amy doesn't really feel seen or heard, and knows that he doesn't really mean it. So be sincere. Say it like you mean it. And if you can't in that moment, wait until you're calm and you can say it from your heart. And at that point, Jack could say, "I really shouldn't have yelled at you, and I'm truly sorry that I hurt you." Whatever it is you say it like you mean it. Avoid sarcasm and watch your body language. Your apology will land so much better. Let's see here. Another one, and this can be really frustrating. It's apologizing without changing your behavior. Oh, man. I get this a lot. It's being quick to apologize, yet never changing. And the apology is worthless if you don't do anything about it. And to go along with this is apologizing too much. Always apologizing even when an apology isn't necessary. Your apology loses credibility here. I think of Kay, whose husband was very controlling and had to have the house be just right when he came home from work. Well, as soon as her husband would come home from work, she would start apologizing before he would say anything so that he wouldn't get mad. So no reason for an apology here. It was time to be assertive and set some boundaries. Another apology no-no is making apologies for personal issues in public. Oh man, this one. Janice and Doug were at a wedding rehearsal dinner for Janice's sister. And at one point during the dinner, Doug stood up to make a toast for the bride and groom, giving his best wishes and whatnot. Then he turned to Janice and said something like, "And I want to say to my lovely wife that I'm sorry I made fun of you for leaving the bathroom a mess during your period." Then he turned to the groom and said, "And don't do that." Well, Janice was humiliated, and she didn't think it was funny. It was definitely an awkward moment. And in the car on the way home, Janice confronted Doug about it and let him know how she felt humiliated and embarrassed. Doug ended up doing another no-no, which is blaming others. He had the nerve to say, "If your brother hadn't gotten me drunk and told me to say something funny, it wouldn't have happened." Well, that's not an apology. And again, he takes no responsibility here. What he could have said is, "Babe, I am so sorry I humiliated and embarrassed you. I had too much to drink, and I was trying to be funny, and it should not have been at your expense." See? A lot different there, right? And one last thing I'll mention is when you act like what you did was no big deal and minimize the impact of what you said or did. It's like when Toni confronted Rodney when she found a series of flirty text messages on Rodney's phone to a female coworker after business hours. And Rodney was like, "Yeah, I apologize, but you're overreacting. We were just having fun. There's nothing going on, so get over it." Well, again, that's not an apology. He takes no responsibility and fails to see why Toni would be upset. No empathy, right? And another thing I want to add is Rodney started off with the apology, I'm sorry, and then he said, but you overreacting, blah, 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 blah. Well, the but takes away that whole apology. Think about it. I apologize, but blah, blah, blah. The but eliminates the apology, right? So if you're going to say, I apologize, then say and instead of but. No buts, okay? So what he could have said was, I can see how upset you are, and I would be upset too if I saw something like that on your phone, and I'm sorry. And I assure you, nothing is going on. It was innocent fun, and I won't let it happen again. Well, here he's showing empathy and reassuring Tia that nothing is going on and acknowledging that that kind of interaction doesn't belong in their relationship, and he told her that he would stop. So I hope you've gotten a sense of what to do or not to do when apologizing in relationship. So let me give you some things to remember. Number 1, take responsibility for your actions. Owning your part in it can make the apology go so much better and help create trust and deepen the connection. Be sincere with your words and watch out for body language and nonverbal cues as well. Big one here, have empathy for her feelings and her experience, whether you think you did anything wrong or not. Stop being defensive. Let go of your ego. And as I said earlier, own it. Come from yourself, using I statements, saying, I'm sorry I hurt you, rather than I'm sorry you were hurt. Big difference there. And after you apologize for your behavior, avoid repeating that behavior and commit to showing her that you will make things right. This is building trust here. Also, choose the right time and place to apologize and do it privately and in person. Much more effective. Don't do it at your sister's wedding rehearsal dinner. And the last thing I'm going to say is be patient with your spouse or partner and with yourself. Trying new ways to apologize and communicate can be hard. Stay committed, keep practicing, and it will get easier and better over time. And come up with your own language and own way to do it. And remember, you're going for the long term of the relationship. I found a quote from an unknown source that sums up the importance of apology in relationship. It says, quote, apologizing doesn't always mean you're wrong and the other person is right. It just means you value your relationship more than your ego, unquote. Yeah, man, that ego can mess everything up, right? Well, that will do it for this episode of the Men on the Path to Love podcast, the How to Say You're Sorry in Relationship episode. I'm Bill Simpson, your host. Thank you for listening, and I hope you found this helpful. Here's a question for you. Do you find yourself holding on to emotional issues from a past relationship or relationships? Well, you're not alone. Most of us do it to a certain degree. I certainly know I have. Please join me for the next episode of the Men on the Path to Love podcast, the Unpacking Past Relationship Baggage episode. And remember, if you have any issues in your relationship you need help with, or have any comments or feedback or suggestions for a topic for the show, I'd love to hear from you. Please email me at bill@pathways2livingwell.com. That's bill@pathways2livingwell.com. You can also find my email address in the show notes. And if you know someone you think might benefit from listening to this podcast, pay it forward. Please share the link and share the love. And until next time, keep your heart open and stay on the path to love.